Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Rooted in Ag podcast. I'm here with my co-host Madison. Madison, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited to be back here.
Yes, we record the episodes usually pretty far in advance. So after the Braden Burks episode, we kind of took a little break just to be able to regroup. So it's been a while since we've been able to record, but good to be back for sure. They don't know that because we've hit every, normal post, but They don't know how far we had those planned out. We'll keep knocking away at all these questions we had sent in. We had so many sent in, we haven't had to ask for any more. The next one up is, in your opinion, what are some common misconceptions people have about agriculture? And I'll let you answer that first.
Yeah, so I think that there are many misconceptions in the agricultural industry, a ton that I know of and a ton that I don't know of. But one of the ones that crosses my mind the most is the fact that people still think the agricultural industry is just the farmer. And the farmer plays a big role in the industry, but people don't realize that it's everyone else that takes a part that also makes the industry successful. So we have our media people, just like our guests, we have our public affairs division, we have vets, we have lawyers, policymakers, all those kind of things that help the farmer to be most successful. So I think that people just forget that it's not just the farmer.
I like that because that is a very big misconception. I was at elementary schools today, and we asked them, one of our questions was, what's one job in agriculture besides farmer? And maybe we got vet as an answer every now and then. But besides that, they had a little bit of trouble answering that question. But for me, I would say one of the bigger misconceptions that I don't think it's talked about a whole lot is not every single farmer, is struggling and is poor and, has the holes in their genes. You get what I'm trying to say. That stereotype. But that doesn't mean they deserve any less support than the other ones, because I feel like sometimes we're like, they just need this help because they need the money and stuff like that. But sometimes it's the mental health side of it too, having that support, I feel like. And so, yeah, that's my stereotype. So without further ado, let's just get straight into the episode now. Coming from Kentucky Farm Bureau, we have the Director of Public Affairs Division, or that's at least what Google said, Mr. Kyle Kelly. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. Yeah, hey, Google was right. So
let's go.
It's one of those times where you can believe what you read on the internet.
Yes, sir. Speaking of that, go ahead and answer the question if you want to. What are some common misconceptions you think people have about agriculturalists?
Yeah, well, both of you had great answers. Like, that's literally things that I talk about every day, or both of those things. That agriculturalist is a lot more than just the farmer, and farmers are so much more than what the stereotype was 100 years ago of the guy chewing on the blade of grass. Now the farmer is they're environmentalist. They're their own animal care specialists. Veterinarians are doing a lot of that type of work on their own animals. You've got to know so much chemistry, whether it be crop protectants or whether it be fertilizers. Like, the farmer is so much more than that old stereotype of just the, plow, sows, and cows. It's so much more. But, I think one big misconception that you see a lot in the public policy space and in the media is around agriculture and in the environment. And you all understand this, being a part of agriculture. There's no better steward for the environment than the farmer, than the agriculturalist, whether it be an agronomist or the actual farmer. If their ground and their environment, the water, the soils, the sky, if all those things aren't in tip-top shape, then their farm is not as productive as it should be. So a big misconception that farmers and agriculturalists do not care about the environment. They just could not be further from the truth. They care more about the environment than anybody, because that is literally how they make their livelihood. And each and every day they're trying to better the environment because they want to pass that farm on to the next generation. So I think that's a big misconception. I'm hopeful that the majority of people don't view agriculture that way. I certainly don't think they do, but it just seems to be so much in the public policy space coming out of Washington's about ag and the environment, and that's so much what's in the media. But there's so much more to agriculture And that's a big misconception, I think, is that farmers don't care about the environment.
Very well put.
You're absolutely correct. So, just to go ahead and dive in and dig a little deeper, Director of Public Affairs Division is a long title and it sounds very spectacular. So, go ahead and elaborate on what your job consists of. I mean, I've seen you at the Capitol, I've seen you at my school, Farm Bureau. So, just tell what your position is.
Yeah, thanks, Madison. Yeah, I get to kind of lead our public affairs, which is really our government affairs, and help a lot with kind of our outreach programs in terms of like Generation Bridge, which is a program for farmers between 36 and 49. I help lead that program and work closely with our communications team and a lot of the things that we're working with media and different reporters, getting on podcasts. Appreciate so much what you and Matthew are doing to spread the good word about agriculture. I get the opportunity to work with a lot of our media through our communications division as well. But the main thing is the public policy side, that advocacy side, legislative affairs, working in Frankfort, working in Washington, and with Erica, who's our director of national affairs, working with her in Washington, and then even at the local level in our local courthouses with our judges and magistrates and city commissioners. Really all things public policy related, not just agriculture. We're the voice of agriculture. We always have been. We always will be. But we have a 96-page policy book that really just speaks to the importance of the way of life in rural Kentucky, from maintaining favorable property tax rates, different land use planning issues, so much more than just everyday farming we get to advocate for on behalf of our members of Kentucky Farm Bureau. So agriculture, number one, far and away voice of agriculture, but also get to work in a lot of public policy space around the importance of rural education and just other issues that are very important to rural Kentucky.
Yes, sir. So what would you say a day in the life of Kyle Kelly is? I'm sure no day is ever the same, but like if you had to give us like your typical day working in this, what would that be?
Yeah, so it depends on the month. Like this time of the year in October, we are in the heart of our policy resolutions process. So I've got a 250-page workbook sitting on my desk. I was in Louisville this morning. We're going through close to 1,000 policy recommendations that come from all 120 counties and about 27 different advisory committees. Going through all those this morning, and then I left at lunch to go to a groundbreaking for the Kentucky Livestock Innovation Center, which was it's going to be a new facility in Woodford County on the UK Orange Sea Little Farm. The Cattlemen's Association, Nikki Whitaker, they worked really hard alongside our other commodity groups and Farm Bureau to help get $22 million in the House Bill 1 this past session to build a livestock innovation center. So it's not every day I get to do something that fun. But that truly is kind of what we do in session, getting to actually see the fruits of the labor to be able to be at that groundbreaking today. And I do get the opportunity to go to different events like that where there's things we've lobbied for and advocated for, and you get to actually see them come to life. But you get into January to March or January to April, depending on the year. Odd years, you're in session January to March, even years, January to mid-April. But it's pretty much every day, 5 days a week in Frankfort at the Capitol and Capitol Annex, working with 138 legislators from all across Kentucky trying to advance our policy. So it really depends on the time of the year, but it's always around making connections between the farmers and rural communities and legislators that get to enact, create, establish, however you want to phrase it, the laws that we abide by out in our rural communities. So that's really the day in the life, is learning and educating myself on issues important to people in rural Kentucky, and then trying to help connect them with legislators to advance those ideas into actual state law.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a pretty busy guy. So you've talked a little bit about policies and policymakers. How do you navigate that relationship between the farmer and the policymaker?
Yeah, we're very fortunate in agriculture that our members that are involved in Kentucky agriculture, Kentucky Farm Bureau, all of our commodity groups, our ag education through FFA and 4-H, our constituency of agriculture is very active in the policy process. You see those bumper stickers, I farm, I vote. Laws that are being enacted in Frankfort and Washington are so impactful to them that they're very engaged in the process. So a lot of times the legislator already knows the farmer. And it's really, I guess it's kind of my role to take what the farmer is experiencing on the farm, and maybe they don't have time to drive to Frankfort multiple days a week or to go to Washington once a month. And it's really kind of my role to take what I'm hearing and seeing from those farmers on the farm. They call, they text, they are active in our policy process, and just sharing what's happening on the farm with policymakers in Frankfort and Washington. So I'm just kind of, I guess, the go-between between those farmers and those policymakers. But a lot of times, like I say, a lot of agriculturalists have those relationships, and that is so important because policymakers, you know, I think I'm there to educate them, but ultimately when they make a vote on an issue, they're doing so because of the people back home in their districts that can vote for them. And they know that when I'm sharing something on behalf of Farm Bureau, we have an office in all 120 counties. We have a county board in all 120 counties. They know that's not my personal opinion necessarily. That is coming from that grassroots membership in the constituencies of our elected officials. And that's really what gives agriculture so much strength, is the fact that it's not just me or not just you two telling our story. It is so important that we continue to have all of our farmers and agriculturalists out there in rural communities telling their stories to these policymakers.
Yes, sir. Me and Madison had the opportunity to go to Eiffel together this year at the University of Kentucky, which is put on by Farm Bureau, Kentucky Farm Bureau. And so we got to learn a little bit more about what y'all do. But just for a second, I want to step away. I want to get a little bit more personal and really get to know who Kyle Kelly is, and like education, and like were you 4-H or FFA member and things like that for our listeners who do not know you and maybe want to get in a position like you one day. What are some things you did in your younger years that have got you to where you are now?
Absolutely. I grew up on a farm in Owen County. So Madison, shout out to Owen County. Still live there, back on the family farm today, but I grew up on a cattle, tobacco, forage farm in Owen County, was active in 4-H, did all the fun stuff, the livestock judging, the cattle showing through 4-H, and then ultimately got into high school. And at the time we didn't have a middle school ag program, but I went through 4-H all the way up into high school, and then got engaged in FFA. I had the opportunity to become president of FFA at Owen County, and that's what really just broadened my horizons. I played sports, so I got to travel the state, playing sports. But really, when I became president of FFA, that's when I got to go to Breckenridge County to FFA camp and meet people who I'm still best friends with today. I got to go to Indianapolis to National Convention and got to do a lot of the things outside of Kentucky. My first experience in all that was through FFA. So FFA and 4-H are both so important to me. Then went on to UK College of Agriculture. The title was much shorter when I was there. That was the title. Now it's the Martin Gatton College of Food, Agriculture, and Environment. But I had a great time there at UK College of Ag. And then graduated, and actually before I graduated, started volunteering on some campaigns. And I often talk and tell a story from volunteer to career, because a lot of times in the public policy space, I feel like that is your start. You start as a volunteer, and whether it just be knocking doors for a local candidate that you feel strongly about, or you might be fortunate enough at that age to get hired in a paid position. But ultimately at UK, I got involved with some student government association there, and that led me to meeting a few politicians around the Fayette County area, and started volunteering for them. And then was fortunate enough to work on a Commissioner of Ag campaign that was successful. Went to the Department of Agriculture and worked there in the policy space, and then on to the Retail Federation and Ag Business Association, and then ultimately to Farm Bureau. So just kind of a history of volunteering and just being willing to put yourself out there and be engaged in things that are important to you, and not expecting a whole lot in return, but being so blessed and so fortunate that people that I volunteered to help and sacrifice some of my personal time for, they've all looked out for me and helped me get to where I'm at today. So, that's one message I do like to share with younger folks is do things that you feel strongly about and do them because you feel that way, and don't necessarily expect something in return. But just know if you're doing it for the right reasons and with the right people, they're going to have your back and look out for you in the long run.
Spoken like a true servant leader.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really agree with that message. You just have to stay rooted to what you love. And they say when you do what you love, never work a day in your life. So you sort of talked about how you did community involvement to get to where you are. But now you're where you are. You're with Farm Bureau. How do you personally get Kentucky Farm Bureau to foster a sense of community involvement?
And so fortunate for me, Madison, that goes back to 1919. That was the Farm Bureau is from the foundation 105 years ago, 106, I guess now, has been around that community engagement and community involvement. So I just get the opportunity to carry on a tradition of working for Farm Bureau and just staying active, going to county meetings and being active in those communities. But every single county has a strong and active Farm Bureau. So really I'm just fortunate to be able to continue on a tradition that's been the foundation from over 100 years now.
Yes, sort of. I know you've hit on this a little bit, but to continue on, how do you engage with the public to raise awareness about the importance of ag through your exact position in Farm Bureau?
So this is one great way. Matthew, Madison, thank you all for this podcast. I try to never say no to anybody that reaches out from the media or from podcast, whether it be some national group or a local group, because I think we have to tell our story to everybody that's willing to listen. I think whether they agree or disagree, this is a very friendly podcast. You all know agriculture, you love agriculture, but I think we have to tell our story to those that might not necessarily agree with us in the agriculture industry, because I think that's the only way that we truly tell our story to everybody. So I try to always go on external podcasts, media interviews, whether it be print, radio, or even television. But then we also internally, we have the best studio team in America, in my opinion. Matt Hilton and his team, they're fantastic. We've got podcasts through Kentucky Farm Bureau, but we also have Farm to Frankfurt, which is the video series that gets put on YouTube. And we share that out with our membership, where myself and our president, Eddie Melton, kind of host someone different every month. So a similar setup to what we're doing here, but we do it in our studio and on really television. But we try to bring in a special guest, a legislator, commissioner of agriculture, secretary of state has been on to talk about elections. Really just anyone in the industry. We try to bring those folks on just to tell our story and then blast it out there to as many people that we can. And that's really what I love doing it. I love to talk. I love to do this type of thing. So it's a joy for me to get to do, but we try to do external and internal. And Kentucky Farm Bureau, we're just so fortunate to have B. Todd Bright and our communications team, Tim Thornberry with the magazine, then Matt Hilton and Renee that do our podcast and video series. We have so many internal outlets, but it's also, you all and several other ag groups and FFA that do external things to help share our message.
I love it. I love it. So let's get into a little bit more of the policy now, since we have a pretty good idea of what you do and some of those other things. I don't know where I wanted to start, but I think there's an easy place to start. Let's start with the Farm Bill going on to D.C. Tell us, in D.C. in 2022, February of 2022, when the Farm Bill right before it got pushed off again, I'm pretty sure. So will you talk about it, the importance of it, and like what we're looking at right now with the Farm Bill?
The Farm Bill is probably the most important piece of federal legislation that happens every 5 years. It goes back to the 1930s, and the Farm Bill's really evolved since the original creation. Back in the 1930s, the Farm Bill was pretty much all farm. It was all agriculture. When you looked at the spending, when you looked at the programs, it was really kind of around quality and quantity control and pricing back in the 30s. And that every 5 years since then, we've enacted a new Farm Bill. And it's not uncommon to have Farm Bill delays. We don't like delaying the Farm Bill. We want a new Farm Bill every 5 years. Agriculture changes rapidly. But yeah, our Farm Bill expired in 2023 is when the Farm Bill expired, and we got a 1-year extension into this September. But right now we're without a Farm Bill right now. And when you look at the Farm Bill in 2024 to what it was in the 1930s, now that bill is over $1.2 trillion over a 10-year span. So it's a 5-year Farm Bill, but they score it for budgeting purposes over 10 years. It's over 1.2 trillion with a T. It's hard to fathom, but 80 to 82% of that is in the nutrition title, which is around your SNAP, your WIC, and a lot of your feeding programs. So less than 18% of the Farm Bill is now farm, which is your crop insurance programs, your commodity programs, which like ARC and PLC, your energy programs, research for all of our public universities like UK that can have access to research dollars. All of those things that are so important, the commodity crop insurance titles that are so important to farmers, is less than 18% of the total spend of the Farm Bill. And but what that is still incredibly important to rural communities. Because when you look at, if you're trying to expand your farm as a young person and you go to the bank to get a loan, they're going to make sure you have some type of insurance on the commodities you're going to be raising, because they've got to have some assurances. And if we don't have a Farm Bill in place, we're going to lose some of those crop insurance protections that we have. So a Farm Bill is incredibly important to rural communities. And it's, even though it's not 18% farm, 82% nutrition, nutrition is still food. We're still talking about feeding people, and that takes food production. So even though it's not necessarily farm programs that dominate the Farm Bill, we have to keep those things together and create a broad coalition of Republicans and Democrats, rural and urban, to get a Farm Bill passed.
Yeah, continuing with that trend of current events at the federal level first. This could have went out a long time ago since I was in D.C., but I'm only able to really pull knowledge from what I remember from D.C. and then any of the other podcasts I listen to. Is WOTUS still around, or is that gone to the side? Or can you give me an update on that too, please?
WOTUS will forever be around. It is, it's the political football. And back in the 70s, the Clean Water Act gave authority to the administration. And you've heard the old saying, with a stroke of a pen. Administrative regulations do not need to be voted on by Congress. Each presidential administration can appoint their people to positions like the EPA, which regulates the Clean Water Act. And then it's their discretion of what they consider to be a water of the United States. So it has become a political football. But within the last year, 12 to 18 months, there was a favorable Supreme Court ruling that really limited the scope of what could be considered a water of the U.S. through the Sackett versus EPA rule. So we got agriculture, not just agriculture, home builders, road contractors, small business association, everyone had concerns with waters of the U.S. and the narrow scope of a water of the U.S., what was considered a water of the U.S. So they're still rewriting the rules, but they did the administration did get a little bit of guidance through the Supreme Court on what can and cannot be considered a water of the U.S. So it's going to forever be an ongoing battle because that definition isn't established in statute. It's not voted on by Congress. It's just established by a rule that can change every time we have an administration change.
Yeah, that's pretty much what McConnell and Rand Paul said when I got to hear them speak to the congressional tour. Just, it's always probably going to be around, and it's just the wording is what's going to affect everything. Let's go from federal to state. I don't really know any of the state issues right now, so maybe you can help tell us what we should be looking out for in January when the state legislature is back in session.
Well, absolutely. When we come back in January, the biggest issue that we're talking about within Farm Bureau is the Farmland Transition Initiative, and it's keeping farmland in active farmers' hands. And the Census of Agriculture comes out every 5 years, and the 2022 census was published around February of 23, and it shows that in Kentucky we are losing 500,000 acres. We lost 500,000 acres of farmland in 5 years, so 100,000 a year is what we're losing. So this is a state and national issue, but there are some policies at the state level that can impact this in Kentucky. And one thing is the selling farmer tax credit, which is a tax credit that was established in 2019 in Kentucky. It just incentivizes a selling farmer to sell to an active farmer. There will be some updates to that legislation to broaden the scope of who could be eligible to qualify to receive the tax credit if they sell to an active farmer. So one thing to look for going into next January will be how we can expand that selling farmer tax credit to where more active farmers can participate in that program. Because it's a program that's already on the books. It's just not being fully utilized because it's currently limited in its scope of who's eligible. So that's one big issue that we're going to be working on at the state level. And that carries over into national too. What can we do at a federal level to incentivize keeping farmland in active production farmers' hands? There's so many programs out there to idle your farmland, and those aren't bad programs. But we want to help keep people on their farms and help keeping them profitable on their farms. So the biggest state issue will be the Kentucky Farmland Transition Initiative, and anything we can do at the state level to incentivize keeping farmland in active production. But when you look at other state issues, every single year it is a priority to maintain the sales and use tax exemptions that agriculture has. Those have been around for many years, but they're critical to production agriculture to maintain those sales and use tax exemptions.
Would an example of that be like the dyed gas?
Yes.
Fuel?
Yes. So
Okay,
that would be one
let's be
example. Another is just all ag inputs. Farm machinery is the big one, because when you're talking about farm machinery, a new tractor, if you're looking at a small tractor, you're looking at $25,000, $30,000. When you get out, into the central time zone, Matthew, you're talking about $500,000-$600,000 piece of equipment. So if you put 6% sales tax on that, you're increasing the price by quite a bit. You're talking $30,000-$40,000 in sales tax you're paying just in sales taxes. So maintaining those exemptions are an absolute must. We're very fortunate in Kentucky to have a General Assembly that understands that. But every year we just have to maintain those. Another big one's property taxes. property taxes are something that agriculture in Kentucky, we're fortunate. We have the agriculture horticulture property tax value is something set in the Constitution. So we're pretty safe there in terms of constitutionally, if you are a farmer, that ag land has to be assessed at the agriculture horticulture value. But we do have statutory provisions of the law that also helps provide just a little layer of protection to ensure that property taxes do not increase too much in any given year for ag land. So that is something that's important. And again, I'm not super nervous. The General Assembly, they're very supportive of agriculture and rural communities, but it's just every year you have to watch those things, because what's important to us and what we see as a must in agriculture, there's other groups out there that don't necessarily think we need those, or they want the same thing, and that just shines light on what we have. So every year those are things at the state level that we just have to educate our legislators that they are absolutely critical to the success of production agriculture in Kentucky. So just have to remind legislators every single year of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like Kentucky Farm Bureau does an excellent job at priding themselves in programs and outreach programs. One of those that I talk about in my agritourism speech is actually the Certified Farm Market Program. But you also have the young farmers, the woman in ag. You talked a little bit about Generational Bridge, so speak more on that so our listeners have an insight of what's going on with that.
So Generation Bridge it came out of our strategic plan. After 100 years, going into 2020, we had we've had a successful 100 years, so let's look to the next 100. And we have got an outstanding young farmer program. That's 18 to 35. We have a collegiate farm bureau, which are your collegiate students. We're obviously very engaged 4-H and FFA, but we noticed after you turned 36 years old, you aged out of the Farm Bureau Young Farmer program. And where did you go next? And that was something our Vision 100 group, through our strategic planning committee, identified. We needed to create a new program for those farmers between the ages of 36 and 49. And 49 was kind of an arbitrary number. There was no reason to choose 49 other than this is what we chose. But the goal was to keep those farmers in that age range engaged. And then it was, well, what are they most passionate about? When you look at the Women's Committee, the passion and the focus, it's everything, but it's education. And our Women's Committee does a phenomenal job on ag education. Young Farmer focuses on more production agriculture, but they also have the discussion meet and excellence in agriculture. So this Generation Bridge group, what were those folks interested in? Well, it wasn't just production agriculture. That's obviously important, but it was agricultural advocacy and how to become a better advocate for our industry. So that Generation Bridge group came out of the strategic plan, Vision 100, 36 to 49, just to have an outlet and more programs for that age group and focusing in advocacy.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of people think that Farm Bureau is just insurance or just business or just agriculture, but I wanted to share this little story. The District 6 had a young farmers outing. I think it was in the beginning of this year. Taylor Nash and Mackenzie Wright took us to one of the Kentucky baseball games. So that was just a really neat experience for myself as a senior in high school to get to be with those people that have these prestigious positions in my eyes and just see that Farm Bureau is business and it is important, but the organization as a whole can come together to have some fun and advocate.
Absolutely. That's how I got started in Farm Bureau, Madison. It was going to the young farmer programs, and it's, they were going to like Kings Island or somewhere, and I just wanted to go. And yeah. I've made, like you say, I got to meet at the time President Mark Haney and Executive Vice President David Beck, and it's people that in my eyes were, just so important to Kentucky as a whole. And then I got to meet people that were like-minded individuals from other counties that I saw as rivals because I didn't like them because I played basketball against them. But then I realized, they're now my best friend, best man in my wedding were people I met through Farm Bureau Young Farmers that, are in the county next door that, like I say, I didn't like them because they were my rivals in basketball, but they were, my side-by-side advocates for the industry I love in agriculture. And we're still best friends to this day because of connections we made through either FFA or, in this case, the Young Farmer Program.
I love the competitiveness.
That's part of the drive. I think that's part of what the policy, like part of enacting policy is a competition too. It doesn't sound the best to say that, but you're just competitive. You want to do it because it's the right thing to do, but you also, you want to win. You want to get it done and get that passed. So it is fun to have a little competitive side.
For sure.
FFA, you have that rivalness and the competitiveness, but I do want to shout her out really quick. Mackenzie Wright is from Carroll County. She's not from Owens County, but I was doing the Youth Farm Bureau speech at the state level, and she could tell I was nervous and needed some extra practice, and she fixed my hair up. So it's just really neat to see how Farm Bureau members come together to help each other out, and I really appreciate her for that.
Yeah, Mackenzie's one of the best. She's been a good friend for a long time, and I'm just so happy for her being chair of the Young Farmer Committee. It's a big deal, and she's done a great job representing District 6, which, I'm a little biased. I love District 6.
Me too.
Hey, man, my district, we've had the past 3 years, we've had 3 of the Outstanding Youth winners. We've gone 1, 2, 3. So, I have to get a little shout out for my district, a little love. Me and Ty
That's right.
and Avery. But no.
Yeah, I love it. District 4 is strong. It is strong, and I love to see it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're nearing the end of the episode, but I just want to give you the chance to say anything you'd really want our listeners to take away from this episode. So we'll let you have the floor.
Well, thank you all for doing this podcast. It is a big deal to share our message, and everybody has a different platform and a different voice. And I've mentioned it a couple times on this episode, but if we're not going to share our story, someone else is. It's the old saying, like if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And
yes.
And you all are younger. You're younger than me. So you're going to have a different group of listeners than maybe that I would have on some of our internal shows. So it's so important for me to come on for your alls, but it's important for you all to also know that, yes, you're young, but you all are leaders in your community. You're obviously leaders in the agriculture industry. Having a Rooted in Ag podcast, it's had the Commissioner of Agriculture on it. Like, you all have a voice and your listeners have a voice, and I just encourage you. But I think it's important for those listening, like, no matter how young you are or where you're at, whether you are a high school student or a college student, like, you have a platform, you have a group of folks that listen. So I just encourage folks that are listening to this podcast to share your story, your personal story, your passion for agriculture. Like, people need to hear it. And I think we're 1 to 2% of the population's actually actively engaged in agriculture. But I still strongly believe that a heavy majority of people respect agriculture. They appreciate agriculture. They understand that without it, we wouldn't have food, fuel, or fiber. And the general public agrees with us. We just have to keep telling our story and how we do what we do for the love of the land and for the love of our neighbors and the love of the industry and the love of people in general. And I think that's a story worth telling, and the people want to hear it and they need to hear it. So I just encourage everyone listening to join this podcast, join other podcasts, and just share your stories. People want to hear it and they need to hear it.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Join this podcast. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so
That's right.
much for getting on here. And I'll break the fourth wall real quick, battling adversity, because we've had some technological issues this whole episode. So thank you for getting through that and just making yourself so available to us and to our listeners.
Absolutely. Well, go ahead, Madison.
I just want to remind our listeners that each weekend, whenever we decide to post, we will have new guests for you. We try to get the best and the brightest so you can hear their stories and learn about what else is going on in the agricultural industry.
I think we got one of the brightest
thank you
for
all.
sure.
Hey, well, you two are exceptional. Like, I appreciate what you do, and I know that I think you all recognize the big deal that this podcast is, but I want to let you all know that it's greatly appreciated in the industry to have young leaders like you all leading the way in the things like this and doing this podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you again for getting on, and thank you to our listeners for all the support, for coming at you every other Saturday. We're trying to be consistent with that. We've been so far 8-9 episodes in, so we'll try to keep it pushing. And thank you to everybody. Madison, any closing thoughts?
I don't think so.
Lord, forgive us,
We'll
my
see y'all
boys
next
and me. We're having an all-night revival. Someone call the women and someone steal the Bible. For the sake of my survival, baptize me in a bottle of beer.